Good afternoon. Welcome back to session 2. And just before we crack on with this, I can't leave this moment go pass me by without also acknowledging Paul's amazing efforts, and just to reflect on I think when I was pulling together the idea of this project, had an early discussion with Paul about that, and he was just massively enthusiastic, and that enthusiasm has just carried throughout the project and has carried us all along with it in a wave of enthusiasm, excitement and innovation. So thank you, Paul, very much. Right, moving on to this session. The first session was very much focused on the 3 currently key Roseate Tern colonies. We're now widening our perspective, and we're looking at the management issues and the interrelationship between a wider suite of tern colonies and how we manage those. So we've got 3 presentations. Format will be the same as this morning. So we'll have presentation, and then we'll deal with the question and answer sessions. And first off, we've got Daniel Pieck, who will be giving a presentation on the wider colony management that we've delivered through the LIFE project. So Daniel, as you will all know, is the Roseate Tern project manager. Before that, he was working in Poland, and he developed and managed a series of LIFE projects on a number of different species, including breeding waders and raptors such as letter-spotted eagle, and also set up an NGO in Poland to manage those. And I've got to say, you know, Daniel has just been a fantastic project manager. I'm so grateful for all the work that he's done. He's given it absolute sort of maximum commitment, enthusiasm, drive. And I'm really, really, you know, delighted with everything that he's done. And I've also got to say, he took me on a trip to Poland and showed me Lecking great snipe. So I kind of let him get away with anything after that. But anyway, Daniel, over to you, and let's hear about the colony management.
Okay. We've been talking about core colonies, but as we know, you know, it's one of the fundamental issue of the Roseate Tern conservation, of what to do from now. I mean, we've got 3 colonies only, 4 maybe if we take into consideration France in the meta population, and they are vulnerable, and I will show you the threats, but there are also opportunities. So first of all, I will show you the historic and current distribution as a proxy of kind of future potential for the range, and also long-term trends, just to present the capacity for the meta population in terms of numbers. I will also mention, you know, talk a little bit about why the extending range is important, and the considerations for potential recolonization, and examples of habitat restoration work that we undertook as part of the LIFE project. And then Karen will expand on this, talking about biosecurity, and Chantal about networking within this session, because it's all important. And complementary to all this thinking will be Lee's presentation tomorrow about opportunities for kind of a large-scale habitat creation work. So this is just the whole package of how we should think about extension of the Roseate Tern range in all these presentations. But first of all, a little bit about historic distribution. As you can see from this map of the breeding atlas released in 1993, you can see that we've lost colonies between 1968-72 and 1988-91. During the 20 years, we've lost colonies in northern Scotland, you know, west coast of Scotland, west coast of Ireland. But the red dots that remained, actually represent areas that continue to be important up to today. And this table on the right shows all the areas where roseate terns were recorded in during Operation Seafarer at the end of the 60s. And the red underlined showed the main colonies. Despite that, there were many in the peak performance of the metapopulation. Sorry, the presentation does his own thing. Despite of many smaller colonies and much wider spread, the core colonies remained in East Lothian, which is basically Firth of Forth, Northumberland, Anglesey, east coast of Northern Ireland, and County Wexford, which is this famous Tern Island that Tony was talking about. And then when we move to the hotspots, documented as part of the next edition of the Breeding Atlas in 2008-11, you can see that there have been further reduction of colonies, but the key areas are still there, which I just mentioned. And that takes us to what is the reality now, which is basically free core colonies, further shrinking of the range, but now actually kind of quite solid free colonies, with Rockabill being the source of population, and a couple of colonies, well, we wouldn't call it colonies, but sites where roseate terns are, in single figures, like Larnoch and the Skerries in the last 2 years, where they had, sort of 1 to 2 pairs. But the LIFE project also operated on the, former roseate tern sites in Forth Islands, Dalkey, and Solent that incorporates almost all the SPAs designated for roseate terns in the UK and Ireland, and that's pretty much target areas for us. And we'll be talking about this target area throughout the webinar, because the fact that the large colonies persisted in these areas from the peak of the metapopulation performance up to today shows that there is a potential in terms of food availability, and maybe perhaps the declines that we experienced in the shrinking of the metapopulation was due to unsuitable conditions on the former sites, and obviously, as we know, the huge decline of the population in the from the beginning of the 70s throughout 80s, attributed to the what's probably was high mortality on the wintering grounds, and suspected tern trapping contributed to the mortality in the significant way. But from in the last decades, the metapopulation has been increasing with the average increase of 6% per year, and without pretty much any sort of hiccups. However, if we look at the example of the warm water population in the US, it comes with a little bit of warning. While the decline in the 1991-92 could be explained by a loss of many adults in the Hurricane Bob, the consequent decline starting from the years 2000 was attributed to the lower survival rates of the juvenile birds in the post-fledging period, which remained largely unexplained. So it's not given that our metapopulation will be continuing to grow. And that doesn't only depend on breeding, conditions on the breeding grounds, but might be to do with mortality during migration and wintering. Some people posed an interesting question about what would happen if we didn't manage, colonies, these three core colonies. And a good proxy for that would be what's happening to the Azorean metapopulation. Sort of where birds are much more faithful to the sites, they are not managed so intensively, apart from a few colonies. The spectrum of sites the birds have to choose every year is huge. It's over 30 colonies spread on all islands within the archipelago. Represented here on this graph with the different colors. And what we can see is a huge fluctuations of the metapopulation, but not due to mortality, but most likely due to the fact that lots of birds, adult birds, don't attempt breeding in those years, perhaps due to unsuitable local conditions in a given year, or maybe shortages of food. It's the fear can go forever. However, in this kind of unmanaged situation, this kind of fluctuation occur. So why do we need to extend the range? I mean, Steve already said that there are density-dependent regulations on rockabill. And someone asked in the question answer box, how does it manifest? I mean, mostly it is this reduction in productivity that we've experienced, and it's very worrying. The last demography analysis we've done as part of the project were conducted up to inclusive 2016. It would be really interesting and perhaps even very urgent to repeat those analyses for the post-2016 period, because we can have a situation that, like in the US, the fitness of juvenile birds might be lower, and therefore the survival of juvenile birds from rockabill might also be under question. But the main colonies are also vulnerable to stochastic events. Just enough to mention what's happened to the Skerries and Camlin Bay, where peregrine falcon and the otter respectively, basically predation caused the collapse of the colonies for various reasons. But this can happen. And it can happen to our colonies. The rat incursion or otter presence on Coquette was a prime example of that. But it doesn't need to be even stochastic events. It can be what will become a reality. Very intensive storms and prolonged bad weather, leading to mortality of chicks. That will be our everyday, every season reality soon, and I think and therefore we need to prepare this alternative sites for those events. We don't fully understand the implications of climate change, and that's also an impact on oceanographic sort of processes. And that doesn't include only breeding colonies, but also what's happening along the migration routes and the cold water upwellings roseate terns, as it turned out, rely on within the Canary Current large marine ecosystem. This is something that we need to start looking into. There are also opportunities, I think, from the sort of short introduction, we can see that within those target area, there's still capacity to increase the size of the metapopulation. Certainly, it used to be over 3,000 birds pairs in the metapopulation in the peak time, and we can, certainly have some ambition to increase it instead, as well as number of sites. Recent research from the US showed that despite that small colonies might be sinks in the metapopulation, they are incredibly important for the maintaining genetic diversity. So even if we, let's say, sort of bring roseate terns to a few sites, and they are in low numbers, these sites will be very important for that reason. And as we said, we need to focus on areas with good food. And that applies to consideration for selecting potential colonization sites. So first of all, these sites need to be very safe from flooding. The predation needs to be managed, and disturbance as well. So we don't lure birds to the sort of ecological traps. Obviously, for the roseate tern recolonization, we need to have common tern colonies, and those best colonies have to be our priority to make it even better. And of course, good food source, it's fundamental, and that would be, sort of a perfect situation if we had productivity, diet, provisioning rate, chicks growth rates for common terns in those sites before we spend money investing into those colonies with the roseate tern colonization in mind. But I promised a few examples of what we've done in the project to bring the roseate terns or increase the probability of bringing the roseate terns back. And I start from Blue Circle Island, where it was man-made island with the help of what is now tarmac. But over the years, the island suffered from erosion to the rock armor. And you can see the aerial photo here, elimination of up to 1/3 of the nesting ground due to flooding. We wanted to repair this site, so as part of the project, we brought a bunch of contractors, not without difficulties. It was a £400,000 project with all sorts of legal implications to sort out. But in the end, we managed to restore the site with some corrective works last year. That's how it looks. And this is where, the single pair of roseate tern breeds every year, and hopefully the site will support in the future more of the birds. But the restoration of the sites is not just about habitat work. As I mentioned, we also need to work, take care of the site integrity. And that very much is about biosecurity, especially for these coastal sites, near the mainland. We need to be vigilant to have the biosecurity plan and monitoring in place, rapid response kits, all these things that Karen will be talking about. And integrity of the site. In the case of Blue Circle Island, it's about otter. The otter is a problem. So we had to introduce fencing and, as a sort of, as a complementary measure to make the site, suitable. So it's, depending on the site, there will be lots of things that we need to think about. This similar example is on Kemlin Bay, managed by our partner, Northwest Wildlife Trust, where the erosion of the Tern Island was evident and took some space from the really packed Tern Island with up to 2,000 pairs of sandwich terns and common terns and so on. So we restored that. It was on a smaller scale, but also in that case, the otter had to be managed with the exclusion fence, and that's the only then with the old vegetation and wardening, vegetation management and wardening makes this site safe. Moving into Solent and Southampton. These were former colonies of Roseate Terns, still common terns, nesting on the cheniers, and this is like the sort of shingle deposition in front of the salt marshes. On this map there are various colonies. We thought at the beginning that we'll try all sorts of recharge of these cheniers. You can see on this photo that it's low-lying, increase of the sea level in combination with storms make it even worse. The birds are getting flooded. So we brought a little bit of shingle as a trial. It was not very large scale, but and maybe therefore, unfortunately, some of this site has been washed out. Obviously what happened on the bottom photo here is that peregrine falcon make it sort of a canteen from this site, and in the end terns were not sort of interested. The same experimental design with the kind of nesting bonds on one of the breakwaters. After initial interest, again, what you could see in the bottom left photo is a couple of peregrine chicks. We are experts in peregrine habitat creation. If you have any question, please come back to me. We'll sort it out. But anyway, I think over the course of the project, we decided, well, I think these low-lying habitats are really doomed. We need to go behind the seawall. In 20 years, they will be under the water anyway. So we prepared sort of a small design and created these islands, rejuvenated islands within the Normandy Lagoon with Hampshire County Council, and improved fences against foxes. And this year we actually had really good season for common terns. We're starting to see that this work actually finally pays off. And the last example, Longcray Island in the Forth Islands, which is the same situation. The last breeding site of the Roseate Terns, funny enough, under the old road bridge, 5 road bridge. And you can see on the photos here, it's basically being flooded and really vulnerable. So we wanted to create a backup site in the form of the platform for common terns, just to boost the local population, to just make it, sort of more robust, acknowledging that it's not the direct solution for Roseate terns, as they are not known to be breeding on this artificial structures. But we wanted to do, boost the local population of the common terns, and it was successful with the over 100 pairs of common terns adding with this new site to the local increase of the common terns. So finally, some recommendations. We need to assess the potential sites in the regional context and historic context, and also the place, all the colonies that are within those target areas where we think is good food. But we can manage predation and disturbance, and they are safe. And we need to start looking at regional metapopulations also in context of the monitoring. Where to start sort of looking into where birds move around, the fact that we have a poor season on one side doesn't mean that the metapopulation, a local sort of population of birds cannot be moved somewhere else. I've already mentioned its key factors to consider. And I think this is something that Lee will be talking tomorrow. Bigger scheme make a difference, and I really have hunger and appetite for sort of next stage from this project, after trialing some things, to really create paradise for birds, and that includes large islands within wetland, coastal wetland habitats. Not a tiny, sort of areas where they can come or go. Proper, large areas where birds can settle and be safe. Once we have such sites, we need to apply best practice with utmost vigilance, and we develop best practice guidelines. We work with site managers to organize a lot of networking. This is how we need to do, work together at the regional scale, and no regret approach. Trial new things. At least we'll learn something. It's the process, the development of the thinking process when it comes to local areas, but do it together and trial anyway, because it makes you think, you know, differently about meta population management. And thank you very much. And you know, I would like to especially thank all my colleagues in partner organizations and RSPB regions, ecologists, scientists, you know, site managers, countless of birds. We couldn't squeeze all the presentation about all the sites. They all deserve their own presentations, but we would have run out of time. But I would like to thank them for adventure, 5-year adventure. Every site is amazing, and special thanks to wardens. They actually make all the difference and fighting for every chick to hatch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was great. We got 2 questions now. So they're all coming in. But first off, there's a question about the Azores. And I know we've got a presentation on the Azores tomorrow, so we can hear a lot more about that site. But I think it's from Viv, and she's asking really whether the context for the Azores is very different to that, you know, within the UK and Ireland. And I guess the kind of follow-up question is, you know, how much can we learn from the model of the meta population on the Azores with how we manage a meta population over here?
This was actually, I agree, it's not very relevant. I wanted to brought it up because to preempt some of the discussions about metapopulation management and show what can happen if we abandon management. Because some people say, well, we have this beautiful colonies, but the range is so limited because we manage them so well. And if we relax the management, it's only theoretical. We could have, you know, a natural spread of the range because they wouldn't be so comfortable at this site and so on. So it is just to show a scenario that we are unlikely to implement, I would say. Of course, we'll be doing our best to maintain, you know, sort of best conditions on these 3 colonies. But we need to start thinking, you know, what will happen with Rockabill, whether the birds will disperse or maybe the colony will shrink, but the productivity will be more or less the same. But nevertheless, obviously, we will not give up and manage them. But in the meantime, we need to, of course, prepare for this scenario of dispersal.
Okay, thanks. And we will have a bigger conversation about the Azores tomorrow morning, I think it is. Right, next question relates to artificial nesting structures from Rebecca Jones, so islands and rafts. So any ideas why I think it's roseate terns might avoid them? Do they need to be bigger? So we know they're attractive to common terns. Any ideas why roseates don't seem to use them?
Well, I know that they might use them in other parts of the world, but it's not known in the, you know, sort of West Atlantic, you know, East Atlantic scenario, and therefore it's a long shot to lure them to artificial sites. But if we have a network, sort of like you know, backup sites, we've got the core site, which is in natural set up with some, sort of rafts for the situations when, there is some flooding or predation events. Artificial sites can give a choice to have, for terns to have a high productivity year, despite that the core site is, it failed for some reason in that given year. In this context, I think they are important. But as a, primary roseate tern breeding nesting site, I think it's very long shot to believe that they would use them.
Okay, thanks. A comment from Norman Ratcliffe. So I will be picking up on this tomorrow, but he asks whether we are investigating the restoration of the Copeland Islands in Northern Ireland, because he says it's an offshore site, safe from predators. It used to have large tern colonies, but became overgrown with vegetation. So he's saying any potential to revisit this.
Well, as you know, Lee, better than me, you are the main force behind this restoration. So Norman is on top of our restoration list for terns, and I think
so more of that tomorrow, and a final comment from Tony Murray. So just an observation that he showed us Tern Island in Wexford Harbour, which has been washed away a few times. But he's saying a couple of years ago, roseate terns were seen displaying out there. Little terns have tried to breed, but have fared badly. So I think the question is it best for the roseates to leave it alone? Should we look to try and encourage them to reoccupy that site, or given its kind of ephemeral nature, are we best to not encourage them to go there?
Well, I think, obviously there need to be common tern colonies. The site needs to be safe. And with the dynamic character of those coastal rocky outputs and shingle bars, it's better to observe what will happen with them. But any of kind of luring to those sites that are really vulnerable to flooding would be actually perhaps detrimental to the metapopulation. But without knowing the details of the site, but Tony, we could discuss that. But the principle is to have a safe site from flooding, and that will be the major thing for us in the coming decades. The coastal sites being flooded, and bad weather conditions, prolonged storms. This will be on our mind in the future.
Okay, thanks very much, Daniel, and thanks for struggling with the presentation and getting that all done. Brilliant job. So next up, we've got Karen Varnum, who will be talking about a biosecurity threat. So Karen is our island restoration officer as part of our island restoration team. And she's worked on islands around the world, giving advice on biosecurity and eradication. So I feel like we're in the presence of greatness, Karen. She strides the world like an apex predator, looking for unwary rats and invasive predators to prey on offshore islands. But when she gets there, she applies impeccable ethical standards and strict protocols about applying best practice. So Karen, over to you and managing the biosecurity threat to our seabird islands.
Thanks, Lee. So I'm going to start off just talking about, I haven't got my title slide, which is managing the biosecurity threat to UK seabird islands. So I'm just going to start off talking a little bit about invasive vertebrates on islands and the kinds of problems they cause. I'm sure very familiar stuff to all of us. So we're talking about both deliberate and accidental introductions, falling into broad categories of pests, so things like rats and mice, accidental stowaways, things that were then introduced to control the pests, like cats and mongooses, food species like goats, cows, and in pets, sort of dual use animals like cats, dogs, and green iguanas. I just include iguanas really because I've got a nice picture of them and it brightens things up a bit. There's a lot of investigation to like what are the key properties of invasive species, but I think the key one for us to be considering today is they're often really generalists, very adaptable in their diet. So they can arrive in a new place, think, those look tasty, crunch, crunch, crunch. And this can cause huge problems for island species, which often have evolved in the absence of terrestrial predators and often have high rates of endemism, so particularly susceptible. Thanks to Viv, I'm sure you recognise this slide. Thanks, Viv, I use this slide a lot. This is a really nice slide that my colleague Viv put together, just about the impacts on globally threatened bird species and how invasive species affect around 50% of globally threatened species altogether. But if you look at those globally threatened species on islands, almost 3/4 are affected by the presence of invasive species. So it's a really huge problem for island bird species. So I've just got a little case study here that I'm going to talk about, a little case study about Big South Cape Island in New Zealand. So again, very far from the areas we've been talking about today, but I include this one because it was a really iconic watershed moment in island restoration, the recognition of the issues that invasives can cause. So black rats were first found on the island in 1964. 6 species of land birds were lost over the next few years. 2 bird species went extinct completely, Stead's bush wren and the South Island snipe, which are our 2 little chaps at the bottom there on the left-hand side, well, the ones with beaks, yes. The greater short-tailed bat and a species of large flightless weevil all went extinct. So this is, I think, a very iconic case because it was one of the first times that people were watching and saw the impacts that invasive species could have on island fauna. So recognised as one of the first big ecological catastrophes caused by invasives, a real turning point in the development of island restoration. And rats weren't actually eradicated there until 2006. Anyway, that's quite interesting. So I just include that as a little example about what it is that drives the field that we're working in now. So we've all heard about eradications of invasive species from islands, particularly big impactful projects we've been planning in the UK or around the UK. So for example, Gough Island in the South Atlantic, Henderson, that was done a few years ago, another UK overseas territory, and may well be done again. Other ones in the UK, such as most recently the Shants and St Agnes down in the Isles of Scilly, Shants up in northern Scotland, as well as Canna, Ramsey, Lundy, to think of a few. So eradicating invasive species from islands, now very much a mainstream conservation tool. This graph here and the 2 subsequent maps I'm going to show you all come from the database of island invasive species eradications. I'm not sure you can see that. I've put all their logos down at the bottom of the slide there. So this is run by a US NGO called Island Conservation, who do lots of really important work, and various other US and New Zealand organisations. So in eradications, we can see from this graph, eradications of all animal species that they include in their database have been increasing year on year. Interestingly, as you can see, the trend is now slowing. I'm not quite sure what's behind that, but perhaps the quick wins have been achieved, and now we're doing fewer but larger and more complex projects. Just to move on, so this slide is taken from the DICE database. The orange dots are eradications of rodent species, which is my particular area of interest. The grey ones are other, I think they're all vertebrates on here. I don't think there are any invertebrates, but anyway, they're almost all vertebrates, if not all. So these were techniques developed and refined in New Zealand, with important developments also in Australia, the USA and Canada. But they're now used widely around the world, including Europe and the Caribbean. And I've included the Caribbean just in this picture, A, because it was convenient to do so, but B, because there's a lot of UK overseas territories there, which is another key part of RSPB's remit. So we've talked about why eradications are needed and the increasing numbers of them. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about what makes eradication so exciting and saleable in funding terms. So they're big, exciting projects. They're relatively quick for conservation projects. The operational phase can usually only takes around 6 months, although the whole project in the planning may take years. They sometimes get to use helicopters and other sort of highly impressive bits of kit. And you get more birds. You get a quick and very visible impact. And this little graph here in the bottom left, just illustrating how Manx shearwaters increased dramatically on Ramsay Island following the eradication of rats there in 99, 2000, that sort of time. So these are logistically complex and expensive projects, but have really high success rates, 95% plus, if you follow best practice religiously. But while eradications are exciting projects that often have amazing and very short, impact within a very short space of time, amazing results for wildlife, protecting these newly predator-free areas takes time and resources. And this is where biosecurity comes in, which Daniel and others have mentioned in previous talks, how important that is. And you've seen some of the impact, particularly from Tony's talk, about the, those really stark photographs of lines of dead birds, what can happen when invasives do reach islands. So biosecurity, the problem with this is it's a long-term commitment. It's quite difficult to package and sell to funders. So basically, you need to commit forever for trying to keep invasives off your island. Ideally, nothing happens for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. It's difficult to fund. Again, you need funding forever. It can be a harder sell for stakeholders. So for funders, for people using the island, there's this very natural human way of thinking to imagine that if an island is free of a particular invasive species, then the chances of it getting there or getting back there are extremely small. So we're all fine. Of course, biosecurity is needed on all conservation islands currently free of predators, not just those where there have been eradications, though it's often easier to build in as part of an eradication project. And those islands which are sort of naturally or currently long-term free of predators, it can be even harder to generate money and enthusiasm for biosecurity on these islands. So most island restoration, this being the field that incorporates both eradications and biosecurity, most island restoration work to date has focused very much on eradications, and biosecurity work for conservation has very much lagged behind, certainly in Europe. So what I'm going to talk about now for the rest of my presentation is what we can do to improve this situation, what we have done to improve this situation. So I'm going to talk about the opportunities we have to develop UK biosecurity. I've mentioned how it's hard to fund, and it's something we really have to be really clever and responsive to take opportunities as they arise. I'm part of a small team within RSPB focused on island restoration, the Island Restoration Project, and we're focused on both eradications and biosecurity. We've helped to shape, and we've also learned really important lessons from lots of projects around the UK and the Crown dependencies, which is our remit. And I'm going to talk here in a little bit more detail about 3 of them, including the fantastic Roseate project that we're all celebrating here today. So the first of these is the Shant Island Seabird Recovery Project. This was a life-funded project. Those were good, weren't they? That took place between 2014 and 2018. The cornerstone of this, the key focus of this project was the eradication of black rats from this small group of 3 islands situated up in the Minch, sort of between Skye and Harris and Lewis. So the key part was this eradication project for the benefit of the seabirds and other native wildlife. They also included seabird attraction work, particularly to get storm petrels back to the island. And also promoting, a key plank of the project was promoting better biosecurity for seabird islands. So not only setting up really good biosecurity on this island to protect the investment that was made, but how we could, lessons we could learn to help benefit other key UK seabird islands. And central to this was an audit that was carried out to look at what was biosecurity like on key UK seabird islands. So it was 42 SPAs that included island SPAs where seabirds were a notifying feature. And the findings of the audit were very interesting, and they showed that the majority of sites looked at had no biosecurity measures in place at all, that there was very limited awareness of what could be done to reduce the risk of new invasions, and the risk of incursions was hugely underestimated or deemed completely unlikely, just wasn't going to happen. It was not on people's radar. And this includes RSPB islands as well as those managed by lots of other organisations. It was a pretty universal picture. The only bright spots in this were islands where there had been eradications of rats, where there was a much better understanding of biosecurity. And I'll come back to the influence of that audit later on. The next project, the Roseate Tern Life Recovery Project. Now this is a very busy slide that has slightly reformatted and got a bit wonky. From my point of view, lots of lovely islands, lots of lovely birds, but I got to go to lots of these islands, and it's fantastic for me seeing these presentations from the islands that we visited and helped with the biosecurity as part of this project. So a key part of what we were doing was developing biosecurity plans in concert with island managers. And thank you very much to all the island managers that engaged in this process. I appreciate we were just loading additional work onto you guys who are already very overloaded. So the key planks of these biosecurity plans were setting up routine surveillance, so just making sure there were eyes and ears on the islands looking for the new arrival of invasive species, not just rats, but as you've seen from Tony's presentation, things like mink, other mustelids, small chance of cats, things like that arriving. So setting up routine surveillance and detailing what exactly to do should there be any known or suspected rat incursions. And we did have known and suspected rat incursions on both Coquette and Inchmickery during the course of this project, so that was really useful for us to help develop. We've also been involved in ongoing rat control on Dalkey Island, which Steve mentioned in his presentation earlier. So as well as writing biosecurity plans, helping respond to incursions, we've also helped with sourcing equipment, making sure islands have got the right stuff they need to carry out this work, and training various island staff. So moving on to the third of the life projects that I wanted to mention, I wanted to talk about, biosecurity for life. A more recent project began in 2018, was due to finish 2022, maybe extended. Let's see what happens when all the pieces have fallen back to place. So our involvement in the previous two projects highlighted just how much work there was to be done. I mentioned the importance of that biosecurity audit from the Chance project, and that really brought home to us the really perilous state of UK biosecurity, how these were the 42 of our most important seabird island SPAs, and there was practically no biosecurity in place on any of them. And we don't want to be facing big South Cape style incursions and losses of species. So my CERP colleague, Laura Bambini, wrote a proposal for a biosecurity focused life project, which was successful and became Biosecurity for Life. Some of you might remember my Biosecurity for Life colleague, Tessa Coldale, giving a presentation at the Irish Sea Tern Network meeting in Bangor last October. You won't be surprised to hear that not a lot has happened since then, but I will just go now through the main aims of the project. The Biosecurity for Life team are all mothballed currently, but the project is going to be up and running again later this month, and has got a very clear idea of where they'll be going. So I'll just give you a very quick tour of the highlights and aims of Biosecurity for Life project, a partnership between RSPB, National Trust and National Trust for Scotland. Funded by Life, Root, support from statutory agencies, and its main aim is to reduce the chance of non-native invasive mammals, such as rats, mice, minks, cats, stoats, hedgehogs, reaching UK seabird islands where they're not already present. So this map here, contrast isn't great, but you can just see the hatched areas, mostly at the top, because Scotland's where we keep our islands. Also some around Wales, some down. You can see the Isles of Scilly there. Isles of Scilly and Coquette are the only English islands. Yeah, several areas around Wales, and then the rest in Scotland, and some in Northern Ireland there. So focused on these 42 UK island SPAs designated for seabirds. We have 3 biosecurity officers. So there's Tessa, who I mentioned already. She's currently on maternity leave and is being covered by Jacqueline Pearson. They're the biosecurity officer for Wales, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Wales, Northern Ireland and the Scillies. Our colleague Afra Skeen is the biosecurity officer for Shetland and Orkney. And Sarah Lawrence covers the rest of Scotland and Northern England, so Coquette and the Farns. Tom Churchard is the project manager, and Laura Bambini and I are the specialist advisors, the technical advisors to the project. So we've got a really good team of experienced island people, or people working on islands. So I'm just going to run through our the main aims of the project. So working with land managers and communities to develop and implement biosecurity plans, again, a very collaborative process. So these biosecurity plans give site details and discuss invasive mammalian predators that are at risk of reaching the island. The plans mention pathways that by which these species might reach the islands and what can be done to put obstacles along these pathways. It also gives details of the routine surveillance, as I mentioned, is a key part of the plans we developed for the Roseate Islands. How this routine monitoring will be carried out and by who, and gives plans for what to do if incursions are discovered. Training personnel, we're looking at, so that the project has funds to enable islands to implement the biosecurity surveillance as detailed in the biosecurity plans. Either training, paying for boat trips or equipment, such as camera traps or those monitoring blocks you've seen in various pictures, the little sort of chocolate wax, usually chocolate wax monitoring blocks, non-toxic, but they pick up rat teeth marks really easily. I like, when I'm attending conferences like this, seeing how many photos there are of me holding a nibbled block with a small group of people around me as I show teeth marks on a block. These are pretty much the only photos of me in existence. I should make a calendar. So we'll be funding the equipment that they need for doing their surveillance, and we're also aiming, this is an exciting bit, training a biosecurity dog, a detector dog, who's just going to be trained onto the scent of rats that we can take to various islands. He will indicate whether they are present. He's not going to bite them or anything like that, and if they are present, then we know that we will put in place further permitted actions to get rid of him, get rid of the rats. So yes, we're very, and also dogs are great ambassadors for this sort of thing. Who doesn't love a dog, particularly a dog in a high-vis vest? Right, so the next bit, developing a network of regional hubs, regional incursion response hubs, to respond rapidly to incursions. We're going to develop a network of 8 of these hubs to hold all the equipment required for detecting invasive mammalian predators on seabird island SPAs and respond if incursions occur. To maintain these hubs, we'll be looking to set up and train large teams of volunteers, similar to the ideas used by Mountain Rescue or the RNLI. The idea being there's a large pool of trained staff. If an emergency occurs, we can draw on those, and hopefully a small number of them will be available to come and respond to an incursion within 48 hours. We're also looking at training up marine industries and businesses to implement biosecurity measures. So particularly, for example, tourist operations that are visiting these key seabird islands as part of an ecotourism enterprise. Hopefully looking at setting up something similar to the wildlife friendly boat operator accreditation that's in place at the moment, a biosecurity friendly certificate of some kind. And then just moving on to the comms materials that we're producing, there's lots of very nice posters, leaflets, other information that we're producing, spreading general awareness of biosecurity. So the UK hopefully becomes a bit more like New Zealand, in that more people know what biosecurity is and know what quick, easy checks they can do if visiting islands to help keep wildlife safe. We'll be doing this through events, presentations, posters, leaflets, and signs at key harbours. And then finally on this project, as with all life projects, the legacy is really important. There'll be afterlife plans, setting out the biosecurity strategy for the rest of the UK, working with statutory agencies to produce a strategy for the whole of the UK to ensure this work continues after the project. And we'll also be setting up a European advisory group on the lines of the advisory group that exists in New Zealand, so that individuals working on the biosecurity projects throughout Europe can knowledge share and help each other out. So just to conclude, so I've talked about how we've sort of piggyback, we've learned things from various projects that we've been involved in. We've now applied these the lessons that we've learned into setting up and getting funding for a biosecurity specific project. So I was just sort of reflecting on what is it that we've learned that we need. As a society, as RSPB, the society, we're very much focused on evidence-based conservation. So what do you need for evidence-based conservation, for expanding into a new area that until recently was receiving very, very little attention and even less funding? So we know evidence-based conservation needs evidence, and the Chance project, the biosecurity audit for that, was absolutely key in providing the evidence that we were lagging woefully behind in this area, and that a lot of our key islands were scarily unprotected. Oh, sorry. You need opportunities for trial and error. I liked Daniel's slide in his previous one for, blame-free trial. You've got to be able to try and fail. You've got to be able to try different things and see what works, monitor the results, see what works, get that evidence. So, for example, I would say a key area here has been developing the biosecurity plan template, for which the template we had at the beginning of the Roseate project is very different to the template that we're using now going into the biosecurity for life. And I apologise to island managers for the Roseate project for us trialling the much clunkier version on you guys. You need opportunities to scale up. Once you've found the evidence, you've found what works through trial and error, you need to have opportunities to scale up. For example, to the whole of the 42 island seabird SPAs, scaling up to engaging multiple communities and stakeholder groups in the Biosecurity for Life project. And you need people, you need committed and trained people. And again, we provided that through SERP. We've had that continuity through SERP. We've been going for the best part of 10 years now, and our new Biosecurity for Life staff, which have been in post more recently. So it's all about identifying needs, taking opportunities, again, being maneuverable enough that you can take opportunities as they arise, training and investing in people. And I just feel, just for my sort of final comments, I feel we're on the verge of a huge shift in biosecurity on UK islands, something that seemed remote just a few years ago. I mean, I've been working in this field for more than 20 years, and biosecurity has just come, the profile of biosecurity has just come up and up and up, I would say, over the last 5 years, and is now a really major part of what we in the Seabird Island Restoration Project are doing. So not plain sailing, but I think there's going to be very exciting times ahead, and I look forward to coming back to other conferences like this and telling you about the exciting new things that we're doing. So thank you all very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Karen, and well done for braving the tech issues again. We're running over a bit, so we might have to move on quickly to Chantel, but we've got, well, one comment and one question so far. So just do the question from Viv. Could you say something about the level of support from local communities for biosecurity on their island? So, are people usually enthusiastic?
It varies. People generally are very pro biosecurity unless it impacts on them in some way. For example, farmers who may need, if we were asking them to change the ways that they bring hay or animal feed to the islands, for example, or I don't know, if they're running a boat operation or something like that and they see that this will introduce extra red tape. I would say we've come up against no one who's disagreed with the ideas of biosecurity. It's just when you drill down into it a little bit, whether it impacts on their livelihood and way of life.
But I'm also guessing that by the end of the Biosecurity for Life project, we'll have more examples of the sort of issues that local communities struggle with and how we can present a convincing argument for them to take them on board. So we'll just have more live examples to refer to.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. And again, this all feeds into, this is how we have learned from previous projects, and that's affecting, that's influence the practice that we have now, and again, everything we learn from this project will influence our best practice in the future.
Okay, thanks. And the only other comment I've got was from John Kelly about Copeland Island, commenting on the lack of vegetation management, which I think we were aware of, but thank you for that, John, and I'm sure we'll be discussing possibilities for that site in the future. So thank you very much, Karen. Very much so, and we'll move over to Chantel for the final session of this, for the final presentation of this session. So Chantel has been working on both the Roseate Tern Life project and the Little Tern Life project over the last 5 years or so. And prior to that, she did various jobs, including working on echo parakeets in Mauritius and being a tern warden at Long Nanny in Northumberland. And Chantel's superpower is just that she's so damn nice. You can't refuse doing anything that she asks you to do. Certainly a lesson for me there, and probably the rest of humanity. So she's a great person to have in your project team. She's been fantastic as part of the project team in getting loads of work done over the past few years. And she's going to talk to us about the power of networking and communication. Over to you, Chantel.
Hi, hopefully everyone can hear me and see me. I'm gonna go with a yes. And let's see if this works. Awesome. Anyway. Yeah. Okay, so as you've heard in previous presentations, the project concentrated on 3 existing Roseate Tern sites in the UK and Ireland, but also on 5 sites which historically supported Roseate Tern colonies. So our life project focused on improving the conditions at these sites through either habitat work, mitigating predation, trialing new management approaches. And although it's really important to monitor and manage these individual tern colonies, in order to effectively get the Roseate Tern metapopulation and range to grow, we really need to approach this as on a larger geographic scale, which requires a need for excellent networking and partnership across these tern colonies. So hopefully that worked. Yeah. As you know, terns move between sites. So good communication is imperative when managing and monitoring these colonies within a larger geographic scale. Within years, these movements could be due to stochastic events, resulting in them attempting to nest at another site. For example, as we've heard earlier, this year on the Skerries, the terns abandoned. Sorry, just got a message. Anyway, the terns abandoned due to raptor presence, and at the nearby site of Kemlyn Lagoon Nature Reserve, which is managed by the North Wales Wildlife Trust, and Ynys Ferrig, which is managed by the RSPB, they saw increases up to 1,000 breeding pairs of terns between them. So in addition to that, as a result of the British Trust for Ornithology ringing scheme, which you've heard about before, we've also been able to prove that some of these birds had come directly from the Skerries. So we've learned that common terns from the Skerries had been seen breeding at RSPB Hodbarrow in England, as had an Arctic tern been seen at Dalkey Island, which is managed by Birdwatch Ireland and Dunleary Rathdown County Council in Ireland. So these figures and resightings of marked birds prove that the nesting terns within the Irish Sea are just one big metapopulation, and that international collaboration is essential if we want these species to thrive. Common terns, Arctic terns, roseates, all the tern species face many pressures and threats. However, with conservation organizations protecting tern sites within these areas, should a colony collapse, then the terns will have alternative safe nesting sites to choose from. In addition, as you've heard earlier from David and Paul and Steve, density dependence is potentially occurring at Rockabill, and it's important to work and engage with these other tern sites to ensure that these areas are in optimum condition for prospecting roseate terns, which are dispersing naturally. And as mentioned, immigration is a very important thing for the current existing colony of Coquet, even though it's becoming more self-sustaining. So overall, this means, and it confirms, the necessity for improved networking when considering that terns use different sites within large geographical areas to form these metapopulations. Okay, so as part of this work, of the long-term management work in the LIFE project, we investigated areas for roseate tern recolonization using several criteria. So this lovely map you should be seeing right now shows that we considered their former range and distribution of the roseate terns, looking at their historical colonies, those that weren't already selected in this LIFE project. 2, we then looked at common tern colonies due to their preference to breed among other tern species, in particularly the common terns, and looked at the common tern colony size, whether these sites were coastal or on artificial structures. And finally, we based an additional criteria on their availability of food. Since sand eels and sprat and herring are highly important, we looked at we used the catch data from fisheries, and please note the on the map, the areas that are blank does not mean that there is no fish. It just means there is a lack of data. As a result, we identified the following target areas for roseate tern recolonization and began engaging with the regional tern groups in these areas. Okay. Armed with the practical experience in site management and new scientific knowledge on tern demography and diet, our next objective was to develop and share these best practice documents and extend the impact of our LIFE project to other colonies, not just roseate colonies, but other tern species. So this was achieved through facilitating several tern conservation forums within different regions. So our target area for recolonization in the map showed where our efforts were focused. And these forums were aimed at exchanging knowledge, sharing data, and fostering partnerships. So we engaged with the Norfolk Tern Forum, the South Coast, the Forth Islands, Cumbria, Northumberland groups. And we also organized the first ever Irish Seas Network meeting, which had statutory bodies, charities, and volunteers attending from the 5 countries that, such as Northern Ireland, Wales, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and England. So network and best practice was also shared through site visits, where site managers were able to visit their fellow tern colleagues and sites and exchange their expertise on tern management, as well as provide recommendations on how to improve these conditions. So this technique has been proven to be an effective method. For instance, as we've heard earlier, it was only after a site visit to Rockabill that COCAT trialed the nest boxes, which were readily accepted, with now the majority of their roseate terns using them. These ongoing conversations have allowed new information to be shared expediently between sites, such as introducing canes to mitigate gull predation. And I've even heard now how people are considering how to apply it to other tern colonies with different avian predators. So, as visible on our recolonization map and mentioned by Daniel, France was identified as an important part of the Northwest European population. And naturally, we engaged with Bretagne Vivante, which is an NGO based in Brittany that manages the roseate tern colonies of France. The meetings and site visits allowed colleagues to visit both the British and the French sites to gain a better understanding of tern conservation practices. Since our initial communication, we have worked intensively together throughout the project timescale, resulting in the introduction of better management and monitoring methods at these sites based on shared experience. We've also engaged with the BirdLife partner in the Netherlands, Vogelbescherming Nederland and Natuurmonumenten, to better understand how their large-scale habitat projects have benefited their tern species. Further afield, we've also visited the Azores, which supports a significant proportion of the European roseate tern population. And although there are differences due to their location, the roseate terns face similar threats and pressures. And we've met with government officers from the Directorate of Biodiversity and Sea Policy Services, SPEA, which is the BirdLife partner, and national park colleagues to better discuss our tern management experience. Following on from this, we are continuing to work closely with the Portuguese colleagues to develop the East Atlantic Action Plan. As terns are a migratory species, as I'm sure you all know, it is necessary to understand their conditions, not just at their breeding grounds, but also at their wintering locations. Tern trapping was known to occur throughout West Africa, from Mauritania to the Gulf of Guinea. However, there had been no systematic assessment since the 1990s. This means that the scale of the problem was unknown. And as such, we had an important objective to engage with the stakeholders in West Africa and assess what the conservation need and priority actions would be. So we were working with Centre of African Wetlands. Surveys were undertaken over 2 winter seasons in 2016 and 2017 to identify the population of wintering roseate terns and the severity of tern trapping. So although the surveying is finished, the partnerships that the RSPB developed with the Centre of African Wetlands and the BirdLife partner Ghana Wildlife Society will continue to be essential in working to tackle the tern trapping that is still ongoing, albeit at a less systematic level. So to highlight the successes of our LIFE project and its cooperation across seas, we are currently one of the finalists in the Natura 2000 Awards. So if you'd like to vote for this amazing project, you have until the 15th of September to do so, and information is on our social media, and I'm sure we can send a link around. No pressure, guys. Another key aspect of communication was towards the public. This involved raising awareness of the many threats and pressures that tern species encounter, as well as the successes that were achieved throughout this project. Signage was produced to provide guidance to visitors and access, such as prohibiting landing on the skeddies and areas in the Solent, such as the Cheniers. Information boards are a useful method to share knowledge about an area such as the installation of the tern rafts at the Firth of Forth and the Solent, which, as Daniel had mentioned, you know, although they were focusing on common terns, it's still really good to promote the successes of other tern species. This LIFE project has really worked not just to focus on roseates, but all of the species that are nesting in the UK. So these were used to also inform the conservation efforts of Dalkey and Coquet, which are based, of course, on islands. So the information boards were based on the mainlands facing these islands for people who are walking along the coast. Signs based at a coastal site did share a recurring theme of coastal squeeze and human disturbance. And this is really one of the most important awareness raising topics regarding terns that we will continue to encounter in future years. Another aspect of communication was, Another aspect that was really important for communication, we produced a plethora of interpretation materials, and these included information booklets, leaflets, and flyers to help better disseminate this information. And these were tailored to each of the specific sites that they represented. As people could take these materials away, it increased the likelihood of people reading and learning about the work undertaken at these areas. Additionally, we produced posters and postcards and roller banners, which were used to attract the attention of the project's existence, with links to the project or its partners' website for more information. For sites which were accessible, our dedicated wardens and volunteers organized events such as guided walks, site visits, activities, and tern watches to engage with locals and visitors to the areas. Opportunities regarding sites which people were not allowed to visit included an array of talks, poster presentations, and we even produced a virtual reality system which gave a virtual tour of the Roseate Tern colony in question. We also developed a seabird booklet for teachers to use in Larnloch area to engage school children on the environmental issues in the marine world. Overall, we have organized or participated in approximately 300 different events with almost 13,000 attendees. And as mentioned earlier, we also have our own Roseate Tern beer, which was produced by From the Notebook and Credence Brewery, where some of the proceeds go towards the tern conservation on Coquet Island. So, working with our partners, we commissioned 5 infographics to be designed, and that would convey the information quickly and clearly. So we liaised with site managers, artists, scientists, and produced a mix of static and interactive infographics. The latter included pop-ups with videos and images. These communicated the important themes effectively, such as tern diet, migration, and the colony management at various sites like Kemlyn, Dalkey, and Coquet. All of these infographics are available on our project website. So with the sole UK roseate tern colony isolated on an island and understandably designated as a bird sanctuary with no landing, the only way to see roseate terns closely was with a boat trip that goes around the island. So how do we connect with people and communicate with them the importance of roseate terns and the other Coquet conservation messages effectively? Well, in the project's first year, a live webcam was set up on the Roseate Tern terrace, allowing the public to get a sneak peek into the seabird season on Coquet from their phones, laptops, and tablets. In the subsequent year, another webcam was placed inside a roseate tern nest box, which allowed people to see and follow the roseate tern pair prepare their scrape, lay eggs, and successfully rear chicks. So this has been really popular, a really good communication tool. And this summer alone, we had over 375,000 views. So in order to communicate to a wider audience, we produced both regional and national media stories, highlighting the collaboration with organisations across all 5 countries within the UK and Ireland, the educational achievements such as Larnloch School Project, and the successful roseate tern seasons, including the breeding of roseates for the first time in over a decade on the Skerries in Wales. We promoted all of these, and we also highlighted again the issues and the benefits of habitat work, while also mentioning the issues of coastal squeeze. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. So within the 5 years of the project, we have produced approximately 400 media pieces, encompassing press releases, magazine articles, TV interviews, radio spots, social media, and blog entries. Due to the way different age groups prefer to receive information nowadays, we created a Twitter and Facebook page to reach this wider audience. So by sharing links to blogs or images and videos, we were able to engage with the public and provide directions to our project website. Not only is our project website great for giving you updates on site information, it also provides a wealth of other information, such as our objectives, our infographics, and our resource documents. So we've got documents on the importance of food sources for terns, the annual breeding reports, and also best practice guidance, which Daniel mentioned earlier. These encompass a range of tern management topics, such as habitat work, avian predation, mitigation, fencing, and as our project is coming to an end, it's important for everyone to be aware that although that is the case, this project website will continue to be active, and these documents will continue to be available for everyone. So we also revived the annual Roseate Tern newsletter. The newsletter summarizes the field seasons from all the temperate colonies, spanning from the US and Canada, the Caribbean, the Azores, continental Europe, and recently also Japan. So we're not always doing temperate, but it's been predominantly temperate focused. But as this document became more widely available, we've been gaining more and more information from different site managers. And as a result, we've established a close working relationship with the US and Canadian practitioners, including setting up the North Atlantic Roseate Tern webinar in February 2020. This allowed us to exchange and further discuss some of our conservation practices and talk with scientists and policy makers. So just to recap, although the project is ending, we've created amazing relationships that will extend past this project and produce documentations that will be used hopefully by many more people in the future. The wealth of information from international site managers and scientists on how to best manage these tern sites is really essential for how we continue to improve these colonies. So this legacy will not only benefit the roseate terns, but also other similar species across multiple countries. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chantal. That was a great summary covering a vast expanse of work. We've just got a final 8 minutes here. I'm just wondering whether Daniel and Karen want to come back on screen. So we've got a couple of comments, but we may be able to just pick up any more general comments in this last session. So firstly, from Norman, I'm glad he's still paying attention because he's firing away these questions. So this, I think, is for Chantal and Daniel. So this goes back to the map of our sort of restoration areas. So he suggests, rather than using catches by fisheries, which are patchy, don't always target the same species, wouldn't it be better to look at common tern diet and provisioning rate to infer food availability, plus productivity to assess this, and predation risk?
So we have done a mix of that. So we had an amazing project officer looking into tern diet for us, and Dr. Lizzie Green not only looked at potentially the fisheries data to see if we could potentially glean some information from that, but also looked at some of these provisioning data that had been recorded. So we had a 20+ year data set of Arctic terns and common terns that had been used in Wales, but it hadn't been thoroughly analysed. So that's something she did, and she did make a note of how there had been slight fluctuations in the tern diet over the years, including, although the sand eel proportion is still heavily dominant in the tern diet, there had been an increase in clupid in recent years. Whether that was a short-term shift or a long-term shift, again, she concluded more provisioning data was needed to make that.
I can maybe add to that, Norman. I know you know you remember I showed one of those criteria for selecting the suitable sites for colonization of roseate terns, and that included this data. But unfortunately, it's very rare. You know, the provisioning data for common terns is very rare. We had to come up with something rough and ready, and this target areas are not very, you know, sort of groundbreaking science. But within those areas, we need to look, as you said, into the, you know, productivity and diet and provisioning rates of common terns. But we're not even there in terms of 2 out of 3 colonies of roseate terns. And for common terns, it's just a non-existent database. And it's our challenge to, and it's impossible to implement that on every colony. But as a minimum, I would love to see, you know, representative colonies of common terns for each of those regions, or, you know, sub-regions where there are resources to collect this data. So at least we have some understanding of, you know, the you know, composition of prey species and changes in diet over the years. But it's still an ambition of ours.
I think also it's proven that it's never too late to start a long-term study. So this is where, yeah, some sites haven't had the capacity. So if there's potential in the future, you know, it's never too late to try and get this data, because eventually this long-term data becomes incredibly useful. So it's something that we've definitely come away from, saying, you know, it's great that some sites have done this. Maybe there's some, you know, if there's possibility and capacity for it to be continued in other sites.
Thanks very much. Something to follow up with Norman directly, and sort of weave into the action plan, Daniel. I'm sure you've already got that connection made. There's a follow-up related question from Matty Murphy as well. So have we looked at benthic habitat again to inform that targeting process?
Yes. So there are theories, obviously, that well, it's not theory. The shallow water is important, and you can see the tidal, you know, tidal-driven feeding frenzies when on the uprise of the tide, and sort of topography of the sea bottom is very important for availability of food, and certainly it is important to look for. But from the Martin Perros, for example, research, which we'll hear about later on this afternoon, they are very flexible in terms of exploring feeding areas from, you know, inshore area, coastal, you know, coastal zones, up to so-called, you know, blue or deep water, where they exploit aggregation of algs and marine mammals. So although the topography of the sea bottom and you know is important, I think these birds are flexible enough to exploit wide range of habitats. What is important, well, should mention, is the location of spawning grounds for sandals, herring, and sprat. And that's something that we need to look for, especially in relation to intensifying development of renewable energy projects in the Irish Sea. And we'll be talking about that also, tomorrow.
Okay, there's just one follow up again on this issue. So from Joan Walsh, so she's saying it is possible to use fecal DNA as a cost-effective way to look at the species composition of diet in commons and roseate terns. We're almost out of time, so there's just what Viv has just raised the whole issue of resources required to collect that data, which is an issue, and that's noted, Viv. And just something slight, just on a different tack, we've got a message from Claire Greenwell, who works on fairy terns in Australia, wants to know more about some of the detailed methods to manage gulls. So Claire, I don't think we've got time to go into that now, but if you email and set out, explicitly what your problems are, and we'll certainly share, all the stuff that we've got on that, can follow that up on a one-to-one. And I've got another comment about DNA, which thank you, Gemma, we'll come back to your comment as well and follow that up. But I think we better wrap up there. So thank all three of you, Chantel, Karen, Daniel, very much for your presentations. We're now going to have a coffee break or a tea break, whatever you want, for 30 minutes. So come back at 3, where we will have the legend that is Ewan Dunn facilitating a session on science. So not to be missed. See you at 3. Thank you very much.